Hey, it's Yay for Yarn, and today I'm going to show you how to crochet an easy textured pullover sweater. So this sweater is very beginner friendly, great for an advanced beginner or confident beginner, somebody who knows how to follow a basic pattern and is comfortable with crocheting rectangles and tubes in the round, because that's essentially what we're going to be doing here. The body of the sweater is going to be made from 2 rectangles, and then we will work the sleeves from the armholes once we have assembled the rectangles according to the pattern instructions. So this is a great project if you want to make your first crocheted sweater. This is a pretty good one to start with because it is relatively simple to make. So the first thing that you're going to need for this project is the free written pattern, and if you go down to the description box, you will find the link to the free written pattern at the top of the description box, or you can purchase the large print ad-free printable PDF version with the full photo tutorial in my shop. The link to that is the second link in the description box below. So before you gather your materials and your supplies, you're going to need to choose which size you're going to make in the pattern. Now, this pattern is designed in 9 different sizes, from a women's extra small to a 5X. And the pattern is designed with approximately 2 inches of ease, which means that the finished sweater is about 2 inches larger than the wearer's actual bust measurement. Now, the ease varies slightly between sizes because that's just the way that the stitch counts and row counts make it work out. But you will need to choose a size that will give you the fit that you want. So the sizing is set up for what they call a classic fit in the Craft Yarn Council standards. But if you want a snug fit, then you can size down, or you could size up for a slightly more oversized fit. So just compare the wearer's actual bust measurement to the measurements in the chart and the finished bust measurement of the final sweater. So you can choose which size you want to make according to the dimensions given in the pattern, and then you will know how much yarn you need. So the amount of yarn, of course, will vary between sizes. I am using Lion Brand Pound of Love. This is Oxford Gray. And I have used this yarn in a sweater before, and it really worked well. So I'm going to use this one again for this sweater. And the amount of yarn, as far as the exact amount, will be given in the pattern for all the different sizes. But I'm going to be making the extra small. And for the extra small, I only need 1 skein of the Pound of Love. So you'll also need a crochet hook. I am using a size J or 6mm crochet hook. This is my Clover Amour with my own polymer clay handle on it. I have a tutorial on that in my channel where you can go watch how I made this one. Anyway, I'm using a size J hook. Of course, you need to choose the size hook that will get you the correct gauge for the pattern. I just did a post on gauge and a video about gauge, and you will want to go and check that out, because it is more important to get the correct gauge than to use the same exact hook size that the pattern calls for. So you'll also need a pair of scissors, a measuring tape, and a yarn needle of your choice. I like to use a metal tapestry needle with a bent tip, and that will be for weaving in the ends and seaming our sweater together. There's not a ton of seaming here, but there are a few seams that we will need to work to put the sweater together. So now that we have all of our materials and supplies, we can move on to crocheting the sweater. So we're going to begin by working the panels for the body of the sweater, and these are just 2 very simple rectangles worked in the stitch pattern that we're going to be using for this sweater. So if you are comfortable with making rectangles with no shaping at all, then the body of the sweater panels will be relatively simple to work. So we're going to be making 2 very long, narrow rectangles, and what we need to do is we're going to begin not with a foundation chain, but with a row of foundation single crochet. Now, foundation single crochet is a way of working both the foundation edge and the first row of single crochet at the same time. And this is super helpful because we can get the stretch in the foundation edge to match the rest of the fabric, and that will help our sweater hang better. And that will also be helpful because it is easier to work into than a foundation chain. Now, if you really want to use a foundation chain, there are instructions included for using a foundation chain, but I highly recommend that you use the foundation single crochet instead. So I'm going to start off by leaving a tail at least a yard long, and we are going to make our slip knot, and we're going to begin with a chain 2. So before we get any further, I like to roll up my yarn tail just to keep it out of the way. So now what we're going to do is we're going to insert the hook into the second chain, which means we're going to skip the closer one. We're going to insert the hook into the second chain, yarn over, pull up a loop. And at this point it looks pretty close to a regular single crochet, but we're going to yarn over, pull through one loop, that makes the chain part. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So that is our very first foundation single crochet. And for all following foundation single crochets, we're going to be working into the base of the previous stitch. So here is the way that our stitch sits normally. If we turn it over to see the bottom edge, it looks like there's the top of a regular stitch there. There's a front strand and a back strand. And we're going to insert the hook under both of those strands. Yarn over, pull up a loop. Yarn over, pull through 1 loop for the chain part, and yarn over, pull through 2 loops for the rest of the single crochet. So again, I'm going to turn the piece over so that I can see the base of the stitch. It looks like the top of a regular stitch with a front strand and a back strand. I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 1 loop, and yarn over, pull through 2 loops. So I did one foundation single crochet to start with that was worked into the chain. And then for the size that I'm making, I need to work 149 more foundation single crochet after that very first one for a total of 150. And again, all of the numbers for all the different sizes are in the free written pattern. So be sure to go grab the free written pattern if you want to make the sweater. Now, if you are a little hesitant about the idea of the foundation single crochet instead of a foundation chain, I do have an entire video explaining the foundation stitches as well as a free printable cheat sheet which you can grab that has a full photo tutorial of all of the foundation stitches. So I am going to continue working foundation single crochet until I have the total number of stitches in my first row that the pattern requires for the size that I am making. Alright, so I have finished working the row of foundation single crochet, and I have the correct number of total stitches needed for the size that I'm making. And now we're going to move on to row 2. So for row 2, we're going to chain 2 and turn. And then we're going to work a half double crochet in the same stitch. So the same stitch that the chain 2 is coming from, and that chain 2 does not count as a stitch. Then I'm going to half double crochet in each of the next 9 stitches. Alright, and now we're going to move on into the pattern, the stitch pattern that we're going to be using for most of the sweater. Now this is a variation on what's called the Suzette stitch. It's kind of offset from the way the Suzette stitch is normally worked. So we are going to work a single crochet and a double crochet in the next stitch. So there's my single crochet. I'm going to double crochet in that same stitch. So here's the last half double crochet, single crochet, double crochet in that very next stitch. Now we're going to repeat a little sequence most of the way across our row. And the sequence is to skip 1 stitch and work a single crochet and a double crochet in the stitch after. So again, skip a stitch, single crochet, double crochet, both in the next stitch, skip 1 stitch, work a single crochet and a double crochet in the next stitch. And again, I'm going to continue doing this most of the way across my row, and I'm going to stop repeating this little sequence when I have 11 stitches left in my row. All right, so I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 stitches left in my row. So now I'm going to skip the next stitch and half double crochet in each of the next 10 stitches. And this half double crochet is actually going to become our ribbing in just a minute. All right, so that is the end of row 2. And you should have the same number of stitches that you started with for the size that you're making. So now we're going to chain 2 and turn to work row 3. And this is the row that we're going to be repeating for pretty much the rest of this panel. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working the first 10 stitches of ribbing, which is the ribbed half double crochet. I have an entire video on that if you're not familiar with it and you would like more information. So this little section by the edge is the ribbing, then in between is the modified version of the Suzette stitch, and then of course there's more ribbing at the other end of the row. So I am going to, since I've already chained 2 and turned, I'm going to work a ribbed half double crochet in the same stitch that my chains are coming from. So to do that, I'm going to yarn over, and normally we would insert our hook into the top 2 strands of the stitch, like so. But instead, we're going to insert the hook into the 3rd loop. So as you can see right here, there's 2 strands that make up the top of the stitch, but right here, there's a strand that runs across what is facing us as the front that we can just slip the hook underneath, which leaves both strands of the top of the stitch free. So then we half double crochet into that 3rd loop, and it leaves the top of the stitch free, like I said, which creates a ribbed look, a kind of knit look ribbing in this little section of the sweater. So like I said, I have an entire video on this stitch if you want to go check that out. But now that we've worked that first ribbed half double crochet in the same stitch that the chain was coming from, I'm going to rib half double crochet in each of the next 9 stitches. So again, this is just like a regular half double crochet, only instead of inserting into the top of the stitch, we're inserting into this 3rd loop, or this horizontal strand that runs across the front. Alright, so that is my last ribbed half double crochet, and you can kind of see how that on the other side, the tops of those stitches have kind of popped forward to make that knit look. So now I am again going to work a single crochet and a double crochet in the next stitch, like so. And then again, we're going to repeat that same little sequence most of the way across till we have 11 stitches left, and that sequence is to skip the next stitch and work a single crochet and a double crochet into the following stitch, skip the next stitch, single crochet, double crochet into the next stitch, skip a stitch, single crochet, double crochet into the next stitch. And like I said, we're going to be repeating this all the way across until we have 11 stitches left in the row. Alright, so I've got 11 stitches left in my row. And now we're going to skip 1 stitch and half double crochet in the 3rd loop, or work that ribbed half double crochet, same thing, in the next 10 stitches. So we are working the ribbed half double crochet into the 3rd loop of all of the half double crochet stitches from the previous row. And this creates the ribbing on this end of the panel. And once we get to the last stitch, we are not going to work into the top of that chain 2 from the beginning of the previous row, because we're not counting that as a stitch. So that is the end of row 3, and as you can see, we have this little section of ribbing, then we have the rest of the row in a stitch pattern, and then of course the little section of ribbing at the other end. So row 3 is pretty much what we're going to be repeating for the rest of this panel. And the pattern will tell you how many times you should repeat row 3. But for the size that I'm making, which is the extra small, I'm going to repeat row 3 18 more times, not including when I just did it for the first time, 18 more times after what I've already got here for the rest of my panel. So that is going to be the end of the panel once I finish repeating row 3 18 more times. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will show you what it looks like and what we're going to do next. Alright, so I've finished with my panel. I have worked all of the rows, and now what we need to do is tie off, except we need to leave a tail that's at least a yard long before we cut the yarn, because we're going to use this tail for seaming. So I'm going to leave a tail about a yard long, cut the yarn, and then I'm just going to tie off this panel by pulling the yarn tail through the loop on my hook. So that is one finished panel. This is actually slightly narrower than it will be when it's blocked, because when we block it, it will kind of relax a little bit and it will spread out a tiny bit more. So this is the panel for one side of my sweater, and now you're going to need to repeat those instructions to make a second panel for the other side of the sweater. Alright, so I have made my second panel, and I have gone ahead and blocked both of my panels. I've steam blocked mine because they are acrylic, but of course use whatever blocking method works best for whatever yarn that you're using as far as the fiber content. If you're not familiar with blocking, I have an entire video on that on my channel, so you can go ahead and check that out. But I've steam blocked the panels, and they've kind of relaxed. The stitching has kind of opened up just a tiny bit, and the fabric feels softer and, has better drape to it now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start by assembling the sweater. We're going to sew all the seams of the main part of the sweater before we add the sleeves. So what I have here is both of my panels. Obviously they're going this way, so I have both ribbings at the bottom. And I have my panels facing me so that the foundation edges are in the middle. So here's the foundation edge of one panel, here's the foundation edge of the other panel, and they both have the same side of the work facing me. So if you look on this side, we are looking at the last row of this panel is the bumpy one, which is the wrong side of that last row, and on this side we also have the wrong side of the last row facing. So I've got a yarn tail down here at the edge between where my two panels are laying, and I'm going to use this, and we're going to start sewing up the center back seam. Alright, so here is my yarn tail, and I'm going to grab a yarn needle that has the appropriately sized eye for the yarn that I'm using, and I'm going to thread this tail into my yarn needle. So we're going to be whip stitching these two panels together until we get to a certain point, and then we're going to stop. And we're going to leave a opening at the top, which is going to be the neck hole. And so for this back seam, we're going to be whip stitching pairs of stitches together. So a pair of stitches is one stitch from this side and one stitch from this side. We're going to be whipping pairs of stitches together until we have done a certain number of those, and then we'll stop. And the pattern will tell you how many stitches to sew together before you're supposed to stop. So I'm going to take my yarn needle and the tail that is on my needle, and I'm going to come across to the very first foundation edge stitch on this panel, and I'm also going to pick up the very first foundation edge stitch on the other panel, like so. And if we look at the stitches on the foundation edge, because we use that foundation single crochet instead of a foundation chain, this is going to be a lot easier to stitch together because it looks like we're working into the tops of the stitches. And we're going to first stitch through these first two stitches at the very base of our seam. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that through, and that's my first stitch. And then I'm going to, of course, come up here, take a stitch from this side, and then another stitch from this side, and that's another pair of stitches. So we did the first pair down here, the second pair is currently on my needle, and we're going to go ahead and pull that through. And for the size that I'm making, I'm supposed to whip stitch 65 pairs of stitches together. So this is my third pair of stitches, and then here is the fourth pair of stitches, and I'm going to keep doing this, just whip stitching all the way up until I have done a total of 65 pairs of stitches, which means I've done 65 stitches on this side with 65 stitches on this side, and then we're going to stop. Alright, so I have finished stitching all of the stitches that I need for the back seam for the size that I'm making. So now I'm going to take one last stitch right through the previous pair of stitches that I just did, wrap the yarn around the needle, and pull it through to make a knot. And we want to get that knot as close to the fabric as possible so that it is not super visible or obvious. Alright, so that is the center back seam, and I will go ahead and weave in this tail, but I'm also going to show you how to stitch the front seam. So now we're going to take this whole thing and flip it around the other way. So here is the top of the center back seam, and now we're going to do the center front seam. Now I will say that this one is kind of adjustable because the center front seam decides the depth of the neckline. So if you want a higher or lower neckline than what the pattern gives, the way it's written, then you can make a higher or lower neckline by adjusting how far you stitch up the center front. So the pattern will tell you how many pairs of stitches to join for the center front seam, but like I said, you can adjust that. I'm going to go ahead and take the yarn tail that is kind of all rolled up here at the corner of one of my panels, and I'm going to thread that into my yarn needle. And I'm going to stitch this seam in very much the same way, except I'm going to be doing a different number of stitches to join. So for the size that I'm making, which is the extra small, I need to be joining 55 pairs of stitches for the center front seam. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that seam and stop when I have gone through 55 pairs of stitches. Alright, so I have done all of the stitches for that center front seam, and I am going to make another stitch in the same place and make my little knot. So of course I will go ahead and weave in this tail in a little bit, but now we're going to go ahead and do the side seams. And we're going to do the side seams before we work the sleeves. So we're going to stitch up the side seams to a point, then leave an opening, and then we will crochet around that opening to make the sleeve. So I am going to lay this out so that the center front seam is, of course, in the front. We can see the neck opening here. And now what we're going to do is kind of smooth all this out and get the extra yarn tails out of the way. And we're going to stitch up the side seams. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this yarn tail that is right here at the bottom corner and thread it into my yarn needle, of course. And this time, instead of joining so many pairs of stitches, we're going to join pairs of stitches until we have a certain number left at the top. So for the size that I'm making, which is the extra small, I'm going to join pairs of stitches by using my whip stitch, of course, until I have 38 stitches left in the armhole. So I'm going to go ahead and start stitching, and I'm just going to whip stitch as normal through each pair of stitches until I get to this part up here, and then I only want to have 38 stitches left that have not been stitched through, because that's going to be where we start the sleeve. And of course the number will be different if you're making a different size, but for the size that I'm making, I need 38 stitches left for the armhole. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch up to the point where I have 38 stitches left that have not been stitched through yet. I'll make my knot, and then of course I will do the same thing on the other side for the other side seam. And then I will go ahead and weave in all of my tails so that we can begin the sleeve, because this seam and the other side seam are very similar to what we've been doing. We are just stopping at a different point. So I have finished seaming my body of the sweater, and now it's time to add the sleeves. So if we look at our piece right now, here is the neck opening. Then of course down here we have the ribbing and the sides. And then at the top up here we have these two openings for the armholes. And we are going to now join yarn in one of these stitches of the armholes and then work in the round to make the sleeves. So I'm going to grab one of these armholes here and kind of open it up. And if you remember how we sewed up the side seam, we left a certain number of stitches open for the armhole. And that number of stitches is going to be the number of stitches that we need for the rounds of the sleeve. So I've got my crochet hook here, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the working yarn. And what we're going to do is we're going to come to the base of the armhole, and we can kind of see where the last stitches that we seamed into are. So this one right here and this one right here are the ones that we seamed into. We're going to ignore those two because they've already been, stitched together. And I'm going to insert my hook into the top of either the stitch on the one side of the seam or the first stitch on the other side of the seam. And what makes the difference is we want to be inserting it into the top of a double crochet. So we're going to find which one of these two stitches is a double crochet. Now we're looking at the back side of the row, but we can turn it over and see that this one on this side of the seam is the double crochet. And because we are always skipping the single crochets and working into the double crochets, we need to make sure that we pull up our new loop of yarn in that double crochet and not in the single crochet, so that it will make our stitch pattern look continuous. So in this double crochet, in the top of the double crochet, we are going to work a chainless starting single crochet in the top of the stitch. So that basically means that we are going to stretch the loop on our hook a little bit and work a regular single crochet in that same stitch. But I'm going to come down here and grab another strand of yarn from that double crochet just to make it a little more secure, because we have already pulled up a loop in the top two strands of the stitch. So there's my CSSC, or my chainless starting single crochet, in the same stitch. So now I'm going to work a double crochet in the same stitch that I just worked that chainless starting single crochet into. Then of course we are going to skip the single crochet that is next to the seam on this side, and then we're going to single crochet, double crochet into that next double crochet. So now we are going to work that little sequence again all the way around. We're going to skip the next stitch and then single crochet, double crochet into the following stitch, skip a stitch, single crochet, double crochet into the next stitch, and as usual we are working into the tops of the double crochets and not the single crochets. So we're going to keep doing this all the way around until we have one stitch left. Alright, so we're almost back around to the beginning, and as you can see, right here is our first stitch. So I've got to skip one more, work the single crochet, double crochet into that next stitch, and now we only have one stitch left before that chainless starting single crochet. So I'm going to skip the last stitch and I'm going to join with an invisible slip stitch into the top of that chainless starting single crochet. And this just means that we're going to stretch the loop on the hook, let go of it, insert the hook into the top of the chainless starting stitch from back to front, grab that loop and pull it through from front to back. Now if you want more information on the chainless starting stitches, I have an entire video on that. I actually have multiple videos on those, so you can go check those out. And as you can see, because our stitch pattern involves skipping stitches, and because this is a kind of a intersection of several different angles of stitching right here, we are going to have this little bitty gap, but we can come back later with our yarn tail. In fact, we can do it right now. And we'll just grab that yarn tail, thread it onto the yarn needle, And then I'm just going to go ahead and stretch the loop on my hook and let go of it just so you can see what I'm doing better. So here is that little tiny gap. We can just bring the yarn tail, kind of weave it through a couple stitches over to that gap, and then we can close it up. So we're just going to kind of stitch that little gap closed so that you don't have a little tiny hole in your sweater right at the underarm. Alright, so there's the gap. Now I can just make a little knot and tie off. So there's the yarn tail. Of course, we will weave that in later. But that has eliminated that little gap that we had where we joined right above that seam. So now I'm going to go ahead and stick the loop back on my hook. And for round 2 of the sleeve, we are going to turn the work. And because the stitch pattern that we are using here, it gets the look that it has because we've been turning the work back and forth in rows for these other panels, we also need to turn the work for the sleeves. So the second round for the sleeve is basically identical to the first one, except that we are turning at the beginning of the round. So we're going to turn, which I just did. Then we're going to work a chainless starting single crochet, which is again to stretch the loop on the hook and work a regular single crochet in that first stitch. And then we're going to work a double crochet also into that same stitch. And then of course we're going to do the little skip one, single crochet and double crochet into the next stitch. Again, skip a stitch, work a single crochet and a double crochet into the next one, and we're going to repeat that little sequence all the way around until we have one stitch left. Alright, so that is the last double crochet to work into. There's one stitch left in the round before our chainless starting single crochet, so I'm going to go ahead and join that with an invisible slip stitch. And if you're not used to using this chainless starting single crochet, then you might also put a stitch marker in that stitch so that you remember where it is, because it kind of slants up as opposed to just sticking straight up. And it could, if you're not paying super close attention, you might accidentally start continually working around the next round when you're not supposed to. You're supposed to join in that first stitch, and then of course we're going to turn again and work round 2 again. So we're going to keep repeating round 2 until you have done it the total number of times for the size that you're working. Every size is going to have a different number of times that you're going to repeat round 2, because there are different numbers of times that you're going to need to work the decrease round, which is what's going to make the sleeve smaller towards the wrist. And some of the larger sizes require more decrease rounds to make it smaller, closer to the wrist. And so we'll also need less rounds of round 2 because, you have to balance out the correct length. So for the size that I'm making, I'm going to go ahead and work the number of round 2s that is required for this size, and then I will show you how to work round 3, which is our decrease round. So here is the sleeve that I have so far, and I have repeated row 2 the correct number of times for the size that I'm making. So now I need to start working row 3, which is the decrease round, and we are going to be decreasing stitches so that the sleeve gets narrower to the circumference for the wrist. So depending on which size that you're making, some sizes will have fewer repeats of round 2 and will have more repeats of round 3, just because if the sleeve is larger, then even though the wrist sizes are also larger on the larger sizes, there's just more stitches that need to be decreased down. So here is the last round that I have worked, and I'm going to turn the work for round 3. I'm going to work a chainless starting single crochet in that very first stitch, and a double crochet in that same spot. And then we're going to do that little sequence that we normally repeat. We're going to skip a stitch and work a single crochet and a double crochet in the next stitch. Skip a stitch, single crochet, double crochet in the next stitch. And we're going to continue repeating this little sequence all the way around until we have 5 stitches left in the row. Alright, so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches left in my round. This right here is the top of my chainless starting single crochet, so we're not counting that, of course. But now we are going to work the little decrease part of this decrease round. So I'm going to skip the next stitch, and then I'm going to work a single crochet 2 together, which is to insert the hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, insert the hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on the hook. So as you can see, we skipped a stitch here like we normally would, and we worked the first part of that single crochet 2 together into the top of the double crochet from the row below. So now we did our single crochet 2 together, and we're going to do a double crochet 2 together. So to do that, I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, so that's part of a double crochet. I'm going to yarn over again, insert the hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Now I have 3 loops left on the hook, and I will yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on the hook. So that's my double crochet 2 together. Now I'm going to join into the top of that first stitch with the invisible slip stitch, and that is the end of round 3. And since we worked a single crochet 2 together and a double crochet 2 together, we have decreased, or basically gotten rid of, 2 stitches from our round. So now we're just going to continue repeating round 3 the correct number of times for whatever size that you're making. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat round 3 7 more times for the extra small, but of course the number will depend on what size that you're making. And then I will show you how we're going to work the sleeve ribbing. Alright, so here is the sleeve at this point. Obviously it's upside down. It would actually go this way if it were being worn, because this up here is the shoulder. But anyway, here is the sleeve at this point, and you can see, because this size has a few decrease rounds and not quite as many as some of the other sizes, you can see where it kind of starts to taper in. And that just brings the whole circumference of the sleeve down closer to the wrist, because we want the ribbing to be kind of closer around the wrist and not like really wide around the wrist. So now we're going to move on to that ribbing, and to do this I'm going to chain 12, and I'm going to skip the first 2 chains and half double crochet in that third chain from my hook, and then I'm going to half double crochet in all of the remaining chains that I just made. Alright, so here is that last chain stitch, and now what we're going to do is we are going to slip stitch into the first stitch in the sleeve, and then slip stitch into the next one, and we're going to turn, and then we're going to work a ribbed half double crochet into each of these half double crochet down here. So we basically slip stitched up the edge of the wrist, or of the cuff of the sleeve, so that we can now kind of use that to replace the turning chain and work our way back across this piece of ribbing. Alright, there's my 10 half double crochet. I'm now going to chain 2 and turn again, and I'm going to rib half double crochet in the same stitch, and then in the remaining 9, so that we have ribbed half double crochet in each of these stitches across. Alright, there's the last one, and you can see how that this was the last stitch we slip stitched into from the sleeve. We're going to slip stitch into the next stitch and the stitch after, so that's 2 slip stitches. Then we're going to turn and work the ribbed half double crochet in each of the 10 ribbed half double crochet from the row below. So again, we're going to chain 2 and turn, and then we are working that ribbed half double crochet across, and I am going to go ahead and pull that little knot over so I can crochet over it, because there's a knot in the yarn right there. And then we can just kind of help to hide it. So I'm going to rib half double crochet all the way across this little section, and then slip stitch in the next stitch of the cuff and in the stitch after. So again, I'm going to turn, half double crochet in the third loop, or do that ribbed half double crochet all the way across here, chain 2, turn, ribbed half double crochet all the way back, slip stitch up the next 2 stitches of the cuff, and so on, pretty much until we get all the way around to the beginning. Alright, so as you can see, I have finished the cuff of my sleeve, and there are no more stitches left from the original, from the last round of that sleeve to slip stitch into. I've already gone into all of those. So right now, all we have left to do is stitch up this little slit right here with our yarn needle. So I'm going to leave a tail, cut the yarn, and tie off. And then I'm going to grab my yarn needle and I'm going to thread that tail into the yarn needle. So now all we have to do is just stitch this together. So I am going to stitch the sleeve cuff, or the ribbing, closed, and I'm just going to make stitches that go across. I'm going to make an extra one on this very corner here, just to make sure that the edge is even. But I don't want to be going around and whip stitching, because I want to keep this ridge here. You can see how on the edge there is the ridge of what would normally be the next column of ribbing. So I don't want to go around and whip stitch, I just want to go in and out. So I'm going to come back over here, come back through this way, and just kind of do a running stitch or a back and forth stitch. And I'm just going to keep doing this until I get all the stitches of this ribbing sewn together. And then here we are at the very first stitch. So you can see how we have not taken away that ribbed look on the seam line, because we stitched in a way that will not disrupt the ribbing or make this last column disappear. So since we've already stitched all of this, I'm going to go ahead and pull on that seam line to make it make sure that it's not pulled funny, so that it is totally laying flat. And then I'm going to bring my yarn needle down through to the inside of the work. I am going to come in here, make a little knot by wrapping the yarn around the needle, and then I'm going to tie that off so that it is nice and secure. And then I'm just going to weave in this tail. So I'm going to go ahead and weave in the tail, and then I am going to repeat the entire set of instructions for the sleeve on my other armhole to make the second sleeve. Alright, so I have finished both sleeves and the sweater is now finished. You can see we have our neck hole up here. And then for each sleeve we finished it off with some ribbing. And what I love about the way that we did the sleeves is that you can't even see here where the panel stops for the body and where the sleeve begins, because this is all worked, you know, in one direction with the same back and forth stitch pattern. So there is no like drop shoulder seam line on that area. So now I just need to go ahead and block the sleeves. So I will steam block the sleeves of my sweater, and then the sweater is finished. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you make this project, let me know how it turns out for you in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, making sure you click the little bell next to the subscribe button to be notified of new videos. Thanks for watching.